Welcome to the GOTO podcast. Each episode covers the brightest and boldest ideas from the world's leading experts in software development. Tune in for practical lessons, compelling theories, and plenty of inspiration. GOTO gathers the brightest minds in the software community to help developers tackle projects today, plan for tomorrow, and create a better future. Stay up to date with the latest in tech through GOTO's top-rated events in cities like Amsterdam, London, Copenhagen, and Chicago, and by subscribing to the GOTO Conference's YouTube channel, where you can find thousands more high-quality dev talks. Learn more at gotopia.tech.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this next edition of the GOTO Book Club. My name is James Lewis, and today I'm going to be chatting with Susanne Kaiser about her brilliant new book. I genuinely mean that, it's fantastic. Architecture for Flow, Adaptive Systems with Domain-Driven Design, Wardley Maps, and Team Topologies. And if you think the title is a bit of a mouthful, well, the sheer amount of context and the content that's covered in this book is amazing. And I know it's riding high at the moment. There's lots of great comments I'm seeing on LinkedIn. So I'll hand over first to Susanne, and maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself. Oh, and congratulations, first of all, because it is a fabulous, fabulous book.
Thank you so much, James. And thank you so much for having me at this podcast. Yeah, so my name is Susanne Kaiser. I am the author of Architecture for Flow, to keep it short. So I am an independent tech consultant from Hamburg, North Germany. And so I have a background in computer sciences, apparently decades already of software engineering, software architecture. I used to be a former startup CTO, and since a couple of years, I'm trying to support organizations in designing and evolving adaptive socio-technical systems, optimizing them for fast flow of sustainable value and constant feedback. So trying also to apply holistic approaches there as well.
Cool. Thank you. So I guess we'll start with, because there's a lot in this book. Like it's amazing. The number of techniques and practices and principles and actual practical workshop ideas that you describe in this book. It's a tour de force. It's almost like you've brought all the good things that have been happening in the sort of development of this sort of understanding of technosocial systems over the last decade or more together in one place. So how did that come about? How did you get to that point?
Yeah, so it did not evolve overnight. It evolved over a couple of years. So at the beginning, it was just, for example, when I was a startup CTO, I was diving into domain-driven design, because at that point, when we were dealing with a big ball of monolithic big ball of mud with messy models and no clear modularity boundaries, I came across then domain-driven design that helps you to decompose your system into modular components, so-called bounded context back then. And then also I was interested in microservices back then as an architecture style. I remember one of my first talks, James, you were sitting in the front row. That was my very first talk, by the way, just a side note. And all the authors and blog of books and blog articles were sitting in the front row, and I almost fainted. So that was my first journey into domain-driven design, specifically with architecture style with microservices. And then I was also interested in serverless technologies back then. And whenever I attended a serverless technology conference, Simon Wardley was there giving a keynote. And that was the first time that I got in contact with Wardley mapping. And I was thinking, that sounds really interesting, Wardley mapping. So how can I apply it to my own context? And then I was thinking, it can go very well together with domain-driven design, because Wardley mapping, specifically the visualization of a landscape, have the value chain on the y-axis, and then the x-axis, the evolution stages of genesis, custom build, product and rental, and commodities. And that also blends in well with, for example, the subdomain categories of domain-driven design, with core, supporting, and generic subdomains, one providing competitive advantage, the other one is non-differentiating but more specialized, and then differentiators are non-specialized. So I was thinking, there's a good idea to complement them and visualizing them on a Wardley map to derive the value chain. Also, that helps us to make build, buy, and outsource decisions. So that was, that was driving me till 2020. And then beginning of 2020, or when I read the book Team Topologies that came out end of 2019, there was then, that is the missing puzzle piece. Because, we hear a lot about Conway's law, right? That then organizational communication structure is mirrored in your system design. And that what made sense to also having this missing puzzle piece then reflected with team topologies, with their well-defined team types and well-defined team interaction modes, in order to bring them together as a holistic tool set, in order to build to focus on building the right thing, but also building the thing right. And that is something that then I was then thinking that bridging these business strategies, software design, and team organization from 3 different perspectives made sense to my own context and also to the context of my client. But it did not evolve overnight. It a couple of years evolved, and then also trying to apply them. And sometimes, depending what are the current problems that clients are currently facing, and trying to solve it with this holistic tool set and to identify blockers to flow and how to mitigate them. So that's a gradual evolution.
In a nutshell, you've covered so much. And what I really liked about it, one of the things I really liked when reading it, is how you brought terrific clarity to a number of ideas that have been bubbling around in my head for a number of years. But you seem to have described them in the book and brought them together such that they don't just make more sense than they do individually, but they kind of create something that's greater than the sum of the parts. I think you touched on one of the things there with team topologies, where we have these value stream-aligned teams or stream-aligned teams in team topologies. That sounds great. But what value stream? How do we identify what value stream the teams are aligned with? And you've brought clarity to that through this mapping process, where you identify these value streams as part of the value chain delivering value to a customer. Is that what you were sort of hoping to get to, or did that sort of emerge?
That emerged because I was also thinking of how. So usually when we talk about a water map that visualizes the evolution of a value chain, where you have your users and your user needs at the top of the value chain, and then reflected as the anchor of the map, and the components of building the value chain as part of the connected chain of components, fulfilling user needs directly or indirectly. And I was thinking, well, usually it is whenever we want to optimize change, we need to identify blockers to flow. And then we come to the value streams, where you have then the end-to-end flow that involve, for example, the customer-facing value streams that could be aligned to the user journeys itself, also reflected maybe also in user needs as well, if they follow a kind of user journey, but also a component in your value chain. There could be a value stream involved as well. So, and to consider a value chain supported by a network of various value streams as well. And so you have maybe core related value streams that their outcome then support a component of the value chain. So that I usually try to use a Wardley map as a high level entry point, assessing your flow of change. So for example, what happens in your value chain, or what components are involved in the change, and what teams are then involved in this change of this specific component to make this change effective. And that's then automatically it came to value streams, and also not only switching, going from the external customer point of view, but also then blending in then the internal customer views, where the teams are now becoming the users of the platforms, for example, you provide. So you have external value chains and value streams, but also internal value chains and value streams, and connecting them together. So in order to get an understanding how a change would flow through our system, and I guess you need to address both, what components are involved and what steps are necessary to make this change effective, and where then also coming then from theory of constraints, to identify bottlenecks. So where are you, because constraints are slowing down your overall performance. So it doesn't mean if you're not addressing all your investments to improve your constraints or mitigate your constraints, it does not matter if your teams before your constraints are performing rapidly or quickly, then the backlog of the constrained team will then just pile up, or the teams behind it waiting for the teams that they depend on that is really overloaded, then they are idling. So it does not, all the effort has to first address all your constraint, and that is something that helps you prioritize where to start unlocking your blockers to flow, to address those that, first of all, require a lot of changes, and then they're slowing down the overall system performance in order to move forward, to release your blockers to flow.
You touched on something there, I think quite important, which is this concept of, local versus global optimization, right? Which is, if you might have a team that is like purring along, it's like super high performing. And I tend to use Daniel Turnbull's North Thought experiment on this, which is, what would happen if that team was infinitely fast? If they weren't the constraint, where are the other constraints in the system? How do you identify those? How do you identify the flow of changes upstream, downstream? And can you talk a bit about that? Because I found that, we're not here to listen to my voice, so I'll try and keep this brief. But
it's fun.
What I'm thinking is there's a section of the book, I can't remember which chapter it is, where you talk about the different relationships between teams, the different types of change coupling between teams. I think there's a specific technique that you espouse, and that had passed me by in the domain-driven design world. Like, is it team context mapping or context mapping?
Yeah, the context mapping. Yeah. So I was trying to blend it in. So in terms of what kind of context mapping comes from domain-driven design, and gives you an idea how your bounded contexts are integrating with each other from a domain model perspective. So which domain model needs to integrate with another bounded context domain model, because they usually don't live in isolation, right? But also reflecting the team dynamics underneath that own these bounded contexts, that take ownership, are responsible for specific bounded contexts in your system. And there's also kind of a power dynamics involved, where you don't see if you try to address change couplings, change coupling defines what side effects or what, when you change one part of your system, what other parts of the system you also need to change. So, and context map patterns, they visualize or they make change coupling explicit. For example, and it's not always like that they have technical integration, like calling each other's APIs or something like that, or consuming events on a message broker or something like that. It's also sometimes when, for example, separate ways, where you have two bounded contexts, they are not technically integrating, but they are duplicating functionality. And there could be different reasons. Maybe the teams do not well communicate with each other or something like that. Or the integration might be too expensive to do. So they prefer duplication of business behavior and going separate ways. But this is not reflected in an API integration at all. But you might see it, for example, when you analyze code commits. So when you want to introduce a behavioral change, that the changes that different parts are changing simultaneously, or just like, a small short cadence behind each other, so that, whenever I change this teams also is lining to that one, and they are not calling each other. Instead, they have decided to go separate ways. And this is something to make this explicit. Or for example, another one, it's also team dynamics or power dynamics in terms of the customer supplier, where usually when you offer an API to another team's bounded context, then you are usually the supplier, but you can, as a consumer of the API, you can gain additional influence on the backlogs of priority of the supplier. And this is something also not reflected really into technical integration. But you could have, for example, a vetoing customer. So whenever, for example, you provide an API to multiple consuming customers, and one team would like to have a change, and another team that consumes the API has a customer-supplier relationship and has a kind of like say what you provide, they can block it. So that is something that is not reflected in any technical API, but also to see, the dynamics of team influences is also very relevant in designing systems, has to be considered as well.
And I really like the iconography that you introduced to talk about these team dynamics. And actually, I mean, it really made, again, it's like there were some penny dropping moments for me. Oh, when I've been trying to describe this is what I meant. When I've been trying to describe this over the years, that's what I meant, And then to have that sort of common, shared language again, which is why I think team topologies is so important as well, to have that shared language, I think is quite brilliant. I mean, it's talking of the iconography, because it runs throughout the book. And, Gregor Hope always talks about the importance of having a consistent iconography, going back to enterprise integration patterns. And you seem to have developed that. Did that take a long time to do, to actually build up this very self-consistent system throughout the process?
Yeah. So I like to, because you also mean the visualization.
But the visualization, the different icons you use to describe different things, makes things very, very clear,
Yeah, it has evolved over the time. So for me, I'm really a visual person. So I like to, whenever I read a book, I either visualize it by illustrating it or creating sticky notes. So that's the reason all my illustration contains sticky notes. And I guess my brain is organized into sticky notes. So I made a little behind the scenes presentation, and my illustration is 126 illustration, and 125 of them are hand drawn. So, and these illustrations contain 599 sticky notes and 248 hearts, because everyone has the user notes have little hearts. So, and there's a lot of love goes into that one. Yeah. So it has.
I don't know. You're a massive Swiftie. I don't know. Because I'm a Swiftie, so,
No, I mean, I'm not really a Swiftie, I would say. But, it's maybe it's aligns with her. Yeah, that's true. But it has evolved over time, because I need to, for me, it's better to transport something complex and complicated with visuals. So, and it has evolved over the time. So they also provided kind of like icon library, which also, it's really very simple, that I don't want to have I'm not a high polished magazine style of presenter. Instead of they have to be, you have to see that they have, have rough edges and something like that. It's not all linear and shiny. Instead, it's just it's me. It's in my illustration, that's considered me. So that's a lot of things that I value. And, so it evolves over the years, providing this presentation. And also usually when I give a presentation, it is something that you see the same style as well. So it's kind of my, I would say, USP, addressing complex topics.
So, I mean, it does very much reflect you, and it's great. But I can see myself using these next week. That's it. They've sort of entered into my imagination in that sort of way. So, changing the subject, I suppose briefly. One other thing that I really liked running through the book. I mean, it's common to have a work example through the book, but you've got some very specific techniques with worked examples that you apply. So you've got event storming in there. You've got things like domain storytelling in there. You've got just, a wide variety of practical workshops that people can run, that you can just take and go off and look and find out more about and then run. Mm-hmm. That all feed into that. I mean, that must have been a big challenge trying to bring all that together.
Yeah, was a real challenge in terms of, I would love to get in even more, but at some point I had to cut it down. And it's also, I guess it's a really challenging balance, briefly touching them, but giving you as little information as possible that gives you then to hop on, to dive deeper into that topic. But it's keeping the three pillars, Wardley mapping, domain-driven design, and team topology as the core principles in this book, the core pillars of the book, but also trying to express that it's not mutually exclusive to others, and they are complemented with other modeling, collaborative modeling techniques that we can apply. And so I don't want to having them on a side note, this is also there not only exists event storming, there also exist other collaborative modeling techniques. But if you want to dive into that one, it's then beyond the scope of this book. But sometimes I guess it's my thought process in terms of, okay, we also have to at least address, for example, theory of constraints or value stream mapping or something like that, because otherwise I would miss something. But on the other hand, I have to deliberately leave out some areas because otherwise it gets so widespread. And then I don't want to have an 800 pages book that, first of all, it's heavy to carry around. And second, it's really hard to read it in one go. So to have giving you enough appetite that you can then move forward and get your own insights, your own experience into that one. So to spark ideas, I guess that is one of the ideas that I had. Also writing them down to have a cohesive view, but also giving you new ideas where you can maybe start tomorrow to apply those or to learn or dive deeper into other areas as well.
It very much reminds me of the. I agree. I mean, if you'd written in detail about everything, it would have changed the name of the book to Susanne's Theory of Everything for a start. Right? It's all the things, which is But I think you definitely did just enough with that. But I guess the other thing I like with the examples is how then you transition into how you can do this yourself, right? Which is the architecture for flow canvas and your walkthrough of the sort of things that you do when you use these techniques. Can you just talk us briefly through that, maybe? Because I found that super interesting as well.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so there's this, the canvas, the architecture for flow canvas. It's an opinionated, structured approach, how to bring those three together. And it starts with assessing your current situation. And then propagates then designing your ideal future as an initial idea how to move forward. And it is not a rigid framework. So it is just, as I said, it gives you as little structure as possible and gives you as little direction as possible to move forward for the next step. And it starts assessing the current situation, starts with the team of today, and the canvas then envisions the future teams of tomorrow. And assessing the current status quo starts with the teams and try to reflect the current team structure, the current team's responsibilities, the team dependencies to other teams, and the way of working of today. And then going team by team into what blocks the current flow of value, current flow of change, and to identify blockers to flow that we want to mitigate, and meeting teams where they are, because usually teams know what slows down their work, so on a daily basis, but also collecting those elements that support the current flow of change. So in order to identify areas where what we would like to keep in the future as well. So, and then getting an understanding of our business landscape, visualizing the current business landscape you as an organization is operating and competing in, starting from the user perspective with the users and user needs and the value chain, and mapping them the evolution stages to get an idea, okay, what is our current business landscape we operate in and where do we want to move to? So, and then from there, we can then blend in gradually into the ideal future and to the to-be state by categorizing our problem space, identifying what user needs belong to core domain related, core domain specifics or supporting or generic subdomains. So where are the areas when we fulfill these user needs, then generating competitive advantage, which are non-differentiator, specialized, and non-differentiating and unspecialized. And then we switch to the solution space. So now we are blending into the ideal future and trying to modelize our solution space into smaller components, into modular components, bringing in one of the architecture principles from continuous architecture in practice, architect for change, and leverage the power of small. And that is also then addressing, like, if we are dealing with, usually in legacy system, we are usually dealing with monolithic big ball of mud system with messy models and no clear modularity boundaries. And then how can we then split it apart into modular components in terms of business behavior points of view? And that's where I bring in then bounded context from domain-driven design, having event storming sessions and so on. And then I bridge those together. I come then from the core domain or from the subdomain categories, core, supporting, and generic, and blending them and the bounded context that we have identified in the solution space and bridging them together and visualizing then the future landscape. So what of those parts we want to build in-house, where we would like to use off-the-shelf products or outsource to utility suppliers, and then also aligning teams around it that we blend in then the team topology perspective. So usually bounded contexts are good candidates for streamline teams, ownership teams for streamline teams, and then also identifying services that support the streamline teams, delivering their work. So then platform teams can come in, and that they're usually sometimes part of the infrastructure components of our Wardley map. And then you can switch from an external customer view to the internal team view, and also provide Wardley maps of streamline teams becoming then the users. And what services are needed that can be provided as self-service capabilities from platform teams or platform groupings to support the streamline teams delivering the flow of value. So, and this is something that the sequence sometimes differ depending on the context. But this is a canvas that I have developed during my client engagements with the customers, bridging this together. And also I want to highlight the ideal future that we try to establish with this canvas is not set in stone. So it is continuous architecture involved or continuous evolution involved. So at the moment when we gain more insights and we need to readjust our understanding of our status quo, but also course-correcting our ideal future as well. So it's then adjusted due to feedback loops involved. There's continuous iterative approach involved as well.
And is this then about with a continuous iterative approach? This is about giving the teams, I guess, the tools to do this themselves going forward.
Exactly.
Sure.
Yeah. So that is usually because I love it when the teams are. So I guess one of the success factors, one of them is that when the teams make the decisions themselves. So when they have ownership of the decisions, not imposed on them from others, like, for example, from management level or something like that. Instead, when the teams are making decision of their ideal future, how they see it or how they would like to envision it, that then enables them to take full ownership of the solution space as well. And I usually detach the decision who's going to be in what team, like the team membership assignment, to the very last, because then you have emotional attachment to the solution. And I try to defer the situation or this decision of team membership assignment to the very, very last. First, we would like to focus on what are all problems and what could be a potential solution. And then how we get there, then we have to consider whether we need to reorganize our teams, or maybe it's just a shift of responsibilities that the teams stay the same, but their responsibility shifts. That depends on the clients of the team's context as well.
That's I know. As I say, what I like about it is it's a clear, repeatable, opinionated framework that anyone can use, that you can pick up by reading the book. And I know we'll link to this separately, but I know you've got resources as well that people can look to explore, to do this themselves as well. So
absolutely.
I've got one final question for you before we go, and that's if you could take one thing away from this book, what should I take away? What would you like me to have taken away the most?
One thing is, instead of diving directly into the solution space, first try to understand the problem space before, and then also applying from a holistic view, not only from software architecture, but also team organization and business strategy point of view. I guess that, to build the right thing right, we need to have a holistic view approach in order to design, build, and evolve adaptive socio-technical systems. And start with the problem space first, I would suggest.
I think it always comes back to starting with user needs, doesn't it?
It is, because Clayton Christensen, the inventor of the Jobs to be Done series, stated, people buy products in order to get a job done, right? If we don't help users to get the job done, it could be our external customers, but also later on when we provide platforms in our organization. If it does not fulfill, does not help their users, the consumers of the platform, to accomplish their job, delivering their work, then it's not beneficial at all. So, and we always have to have this in focus, that we have to fulfill user needs, either from external customers or internal customers.
That's a perfect way to finish. So thank you so much, Susanne, for joining us for this edition of the Book Club. Talking about and celebrating actually your new book, Architecture for Flow. I heartily recommend it to anyone out there who's interested in these topics, and it's a brilliant read. So congratulations again, it's fantastic, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the GOTO podcast. Head over to gotopia.tech to discover lots more content from the brightest minds in software development.